For my moral dilemma presentation, I chose to cover the dilemma of whether or not the United States should be funding foreign wars with our tax dollars rather than helping our own citizens. To start with a basic overview, currently the United States is funding multiple foreign wars, namely the Russo-Ukraine War and the war in Gaza with Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah. Currently, the United States has sent approximately $175 billion of aid to Ukraine in the form of weapons, ammunition, as well as actually just money to help fund the war and defend against the Russian invasion. And on top of that $175 billion, America has sent approximately $18 billion in military aid to Israel since the war in Gaza began on October 7th. While I'm not against America funding foreign wars and helping nations that can't defend themselves, we have our own problems here in this country that need to be solved first. One of the most glaring examples is the recovery from Hurricane Helene. So far FEMA has only sent $344 million to 375,000 different households to help recover. That's about $200 per household. On to the history and the present state of the dilemma. The United States has a very long history of helping foreign countries in their wars. One of the most obvious examples being American Lend-Lease during World War II, where we sent billions of dollars, a lot of weapons, equipment to countries like the United Kingdom, as well as Russia, to help fight against the Germans. Another example being sending military advisors and equipment to help train the South Vietnamese army to try and fight against the NVA and VC during Vietnam before we ended up getting directly involved years later. And on to the current state, America sent $175 billion to Ukraine, $18 billion to Israel. This includes, missiles, air defense systems, ammunition, pretty much everything each country needs to help fight. Onto the quadrilateral sources of reflection that I used when looking at this dilemma. The main two that I used were tradition and reason. See, the United States has a pretty long tradition of being the arsenal of democracy. This term was coined during the Lend-Lease period of World War II. And we always end up funding and helping countries that don't have the natural resources or production ability to create the amount of weapons that we can. And when it comes to reason, it is reasonable for the United States to aid Ukraine and Israel because Ukraine acts like a buffer state between the NATO-aligned countries in Europe and Russia. And it just makes sense for the United States to want to help keep that buffer state, because it would just be one more obstacle for Russia to have to go through if Russia ever decided to try and invade NATO countries for whatever possible reason. And when it comes to Israel, Israel's been an ally of the United States since the nation was founded in 1948. It is also the only democracy in the Middle East, and America has always wanted to defend democracies, and it would also act as a good jumping off point to a potential military campaign in the Middle East should the United States lose other bases in other Middle Eastern countries. Under the discussion of modes of reflection that I primarily used teleology and deontology to form my opinions on this dilemma. When teleology is the thought process more concerned with the outcome rather than the means of achieving said outcome. See, the desired outcome for the United States would be that Israel and Ukraine win their respective wars to further our interests. So it makes sense that we would want to help them achieve that. And I also use deontology, which is the thought process that concerns itself with following rules and duties. America has a duty as a more wealthier nation to aid countries that would have problems defending themselves, like both Ukraine and Israel. The United States has both the money and the vast stockpiles of military supplies to aid both countries without hampering our ability to fight a potential war. So we should have a duty to help defend those that cannot defend themselves. My suggested steps for action in relation to this dilemma. I personally think we should continue sending both Ukraine and Israel military equipment out of our DoD stockpiles because we do not use this equipment anymore and it costs money for us to keep it, maintain it, and it would be cheaper to just send the equipment that we don't need to countries that need it. I also think that we should be spending more time trying to find a diplomatic solution to end both wars, because war is good for nobody. We should be doing our part to help trying to end both wars. And why I've chosen my suggested action steps. I've chosen the before-mentioned action steps because I believe that America should still help other countries defend themselves, but at the same time, we do still need to have focus on our own country's well-being. By sending Ukraine and Israel weapons out of our stockpiles, we can get rid of it without having to spend money to get it disposed of or to keep maintaining and holding on to it. But it makes sense to give our allies the equipment that they need and that we don't need anymore. So we fulfill our duty to our allies without compromising our own security. By not spending as much money directly on these wars, we can help fund our citizens and help out our own citizens more, like sending more to help the victims of Hurricane Helene, among other issues, like helping put more money to help the homeless. Other than that, and questions and discussion starters. 2 questions. If you could control how the American government dealt with the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza, how would you help, or would you help? And if so, why? If you had to, and my other question, if you had to prioritizing aiding foreign countries or your own nation's citizens, which would you choose and why?